Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. It's a pleasure to meet all of you and to join you all for the launch of this very important report on land policies for resilient and equitable growth in Africa. And this launch that we're doing is also at a time when the bank is really stepping up our work on knowledge and really trying to be a better knowledge bank, so that we're doing quality knowledge work, we're bringing it in a credible way to our clients through policy advice, through design of operations, and just through all the work that we do. So this is an example of some of the analytic work that we do that is really seeking to understand critical development issues and challenges and provide some advice to countries as they seek to address these challenges. In this particular case, on the issue of land. I think you'd all agree that this is an important topic for the Africa region. It is an important topic everywhere, but it's particularly so for us in the Africa region as well. We know that laws, regulations, and institutions governing the allocation and exchange of land rights are a key part of the public infrastructure that is needed for countries to develop their financial markets, for them to foster agriculture productivity, job creation, construction of livable cities, broader structural transformation, and for domestic resources mobilization. I was just being told about the example in Nigeria where a lot of the work on the issues of land is really helping with digitalizing taxation around property and so on. So that's great. The report highlights that many African countries fall short in achieving this objective. Less than 5% of agricultural land and at most 25% of urban land in African countries have documented rights. At least 70% of these rights are held exclusively by men. Registration of transfer costs 7% of property value, and almost 2/3 of Africans believe that the rich can pay to have land ownership records fraudulently manipulated in their favor. Moreover, violent conflict over land resources has also multiplied over the recent decade. I think we'd all agree that this doesn't need to be the case. This can change, and we can have a different, more positive narrative. And African countries have a unique opportunity to do better through policy reforms, use of new technologies, and better planning. By helping to tailor regulations to local conditions, using digital tools to break down silos, and building analytic capacity for policy dialogue and monitoring, the World Bank can play an important role in helping African countries capitalize on the many opportunities to improve their land policies in a way that suits their conditions and fits their objectives. The report has been a collaborative effort between several internal and external partners, in particular the Africa Region Chief Economist Office, DEC, that's I always forget what DEC stands for.
So Development Economics.
Development Economics Research Group, DEC-RG, GP-SOAR, which is our Urban Development Global Practice, Internal Evaluation Group, IEG, and African think tanks, especially the AERC and the African Tax Institute, as well as various academic experts from around the world. So we look forward to capitalizing on these links as we take the next steps in moving towards implementation. I have no doubt that many African governments will find this report highly useful as it presents practical ways for improving land institutions and policies. Today's discussion is also very timely as we consider, as I said, how the bank can best support our clients to deliver the global public goods agenda while also addressing the multiple complex crises in the region, many of which stem from poor land governance. We're also receiving increasing demands from our clients to support them in strengthening their land administration systems to increase private investment, generate domestic revenue, address climate change and urban informality. I'm very happy to see so many policymakers here in the room who will share their experiences and their perspectives from the African Union, from Kenya, Ethiopia, Malawi, Nigeria, and I understand our colleague from Senegal couldn't make their flight. So look, we're looking forward to an energizing conversation today to hear what's working, to hear some of the challenges, and to really see how a report like this can impact and influence your policy agendas in the different countries. So, you know, I'm keen to listen. I won't be able to stay for all the time, but I'll listen actively in the time that I'm here, and look forward to a good discussion. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Victoria. So you've already given us a start to this, so I'm not supposed to talk too much longer. But let me just tell you that I read the report between about 2 a.m. and 6 a.m. this morning. So I'm sleep deprived, but I was awake enough to know that it's a very good report. So you should make sure that you read the report. It's really well done. In case you have just 5 minutes, you can read the first 2 pages. If you have a little bit longer, you can read the executive summary, but I think that you should actually read the whole report. Okay, the thing that struck me about the report was that things are not good in terms of land markets in sub-Saharan Africa, right? Some of the things that Victoria mentioned, that 2/3 of Africans believe that the rich can manipulate land records, almost no property taxes are collected, and during the last 20 years, 47 million hectares have been brought into use. And this is not necessarily a good thing, because during this time, land conflicts or land-related conflicts have actually quadrupled during this time, right? So the good thing is that there's lots of potential to actually fix these problems. And this is essentially, according to the report, for 3 reasons. The first one is digital interoperability. The second one is satellite imagery. And then the third one is digital connectivity. And I know that Klaus and Aparajita will tell you more about it, but if you think about digital, the way to think about digital interoperability is that it leads to better documentation and registration. It leads to ease of linking to other records like mortgages and liens and so on, and it results in better land price data, and of course that improves the markets. The second one is satellite imagery, and this actually helps to enforce land use restrictions. It helps to see if the rules regarding conservation are being adhered to and monitored, and it actually helps to improve insurance and credit access, right? And then if you think about digital connectivity, it actually leads to greater information sharing. It leads to competitiveness of land markets, and it leads to easier access to factor markets. What the report also says is that besides these high-tech things and so on, you need to do some old-fashioned things as well. And those old-fashioned things are things like reducing transfer taxes, revising planning regulations, improving the land tax enforcement, transparent and competitive sale of public land, as well as eliminating conflicts of interest among the regulators, as well as better regulation of land use rights and things like that. I don't know if I've given away the punchline, but I'll stop there, and I'll give Klaus and Aparajita a few minutes to actually quickly take us through the report. And then we actually have a really good set of people who who will enrich the discussion with experiences from the region. Yeah? Over to you.
Very good. I think I don't have to say anything more than. I think since you have taken all the points, let me just say that we very much appreciate the collaboration with the Africa Region's Chief Economist Office and also the TP Sur. But also, I think the researchers that I think we have seen a huge expansion of research, and I think that speaks to your knowledge agenda, the Victoria that you mentioned, on land and associated issues that I think, and we have the next 3 days of the land conference where we have a research track where we have with an opportunity to actually discuss these together with policymakers, and we hope that out of that we will actually get very active connections and much more research coming out that we can present in future land conferences and that can help African countries to actually implement reforms in a way that are suited to local conditions, because I think, as you know, the devil is always in the details, and making sure that you have some independent monitoring and independent research, I think gives you credibility and also helps you to orient where you need to go. I think, and of course, in that context also, we are very happy that we have collaboration with international institutions like the network of land registries, and that we can use the land conference actually to foster these networks. I think let me start by saying that Africa faces 4 big challenges. One is urban population will triple by 2050, but most of the expansion is informal, and that of course reduces, as Shomik has shown abundantly, reduces productivity and risks that people are actually trapped in poverty rather than and urban costs hampered by urban costs rather than being productive. High exposure and limited resilience to climate change. Everybody knows that temperatures will increase and the frequency of adverse weather events will also increase in Africa, and it's very ill prepared. In many cases, expansion into vulnerable areas is still continuing. Structural transformation, we have 40% still in agriculture, and structural transformation has been very low. And women face many barriers of social norms and restrictions to actually realizing their full economic potential. And that, of course, is very much linked to land rights. I think land institutions are, you may ask why land institutions are relevant, because land and property makes up 40 to 50% of individuals' wealth everywhere. And of course, one of the peculiarities of Africa is that customary institutions have been long predominant, that they eliminate they secure tenure, they eliminate the need for unproductive spending, provide an implicit safety net and reduce conflict, and also incentivize investment, but they have limited reach. They cannot commit over time, they're lineage-based, and in many cases colonial interruptions have reduced their downward accountability. That has led to significant hopes into formal institutions, both registries and cadasters, to foster impersonal trade and credit access by reducing, as Indamit already mentioned, reducing transaction cost, increasing the scope of interaction, making information widely available, facilitating use of land as collateral, generating prices that can inform adaptation investment. And, but of course, I think what we need to also bear in mind, the formal registries have higher operational costs, and the question is whether they are whether they bring the benefits empirically. I think what seems to emerge is that Africa's formal institutions have largely failed to realize that potential. I think some of the figures have already been mentioned. The coverage is incomplete and biased by gender and wealth. That is mainly due to high survey cost. And they are mostly paper-based, that means easily manipulable or challenged. They failed to lower transaction costs, largely because of high registration fees that are a very inefficient way, and I think we have of raising any taxes. The informal costs often add to that, and of course they don't provide, even if they are functioning, the information that they provide is not public. You have to go through multiple channels and hassles. And I think they command very little trust, even though I think demand, and that is the surprising fact, that studies show people in urban settings are willing to pay up to $200. And I think in this day and age, you can deliver a title at $6 a piece, not at $200. So I think that should be something that actually should be very, very straightforward. So what does that mean? There are huge opportunities for formalization in urban areas. The report refers to the example of Lesotho, of all places, in Maseru, where cost of registration and transactions were reduced because of changes in the regulatory framework that was already mentioned. The registry of charges and more. There is not only a land registry, but there is a registry of charges and mortgages that is digital and that is trusted by banks so that they can actually make sure there is no hanky-panky going on. And I think what is very important, we found credit effects even for women, because joint titling of conjugal properties was made as a default rather than an opt-in option, and that increased women co-ownership to about 80% of all documents issued. Also, I think property taxation can be a desirable intermediate step if the surveyor lobby is too strong, which is the case in many African countries. I think Nigeria is a very good example. Surveyors make huge amounts of money, and I think nobody is willing to address that head on. But property taxes, we all know, they are less distortive and regressive than taxes on capital and consumption that is mobile. And you look at Lagos, the prices of land in Lagos are triple of the prices in Washington, but the taxes that are being paid are virtually nil. In the context of a collaboration World Bank project, I think in Lagos we counted with satellite imagery, there are 2 million properties. The tax roll has exactly that, and I think the reformation of the tax system, property tax system, by the now President Tinubu, when he was governor of Lagos, was touted by everybody as a huge success. What they have is 700,000 properties on the tax roll, and of these 200,000 actually pay taxes, and of course these taxes are a pittance. And of course I think that, so I think there are specific reforms also on taxation that need to be done. I think digital technology can help if the regulations are in place, and that I think I think that is it can increase accountability and record quality. It can increase, as already I think Indamit took almost all of the points. Just let me tell you that this picture is generated complete, and of course that is for rural areas. That is completely based on satellite imagery only, but you can identify field boundaries there. And I think that is something that in terms of documenting use rights and linking, also improving the accountability of customary institutions can be really a game changer and show the way forward. I think, of course, harnessing these requires regulatory and institutional changes that I think partly already mentioned, and that can be as trivial as the mandatory use of electronic signatures so that you can actually have an audit trail to make sure you know who signed specific documents. And of course, I think there is enormous scope for north-south or South-South exchange, because all of the land registries in the world went through the disruption of digitization. And we have fantastic examples from not only Europe, but also China, of how they actually managed that process. And that can be very valuable for African countries, so they don't have to go through all of this hassle and make all of these mistakes themselves. Of course, in rural areas, emphasis on use rights may be more promising, because comprehensive rural titling is not a priority if you haven't set up an urban registry. I think you're wasting your time there. Credit effect, the benefits are lower and the costs much higher than in urban areas. Credit effects require an active land market, which even rental markets, we will have a lot of papers showing that tomorrow. Rental markets face enormous frictions. Focus, and of course the good thing is that if you focus on transferable use rights and accountable local structures, you can actually achieve all of the benefits of transferability. And I think there is global experience in abundance, whether you look at China or whether you look at Ethiopia in Africa, that documentation of use rights in a very low-cost way and with local involvement in a democratic process where the officials were actually elected has contributed to reducing misallocation significantly, and of course provides in the African context also opportunities to better target subsidies and actually make them useful rather than just and reduce corruption there. And of course that links very much to decentralized public land management, because I think people tend to talk a lot about private land and forgetting that the big corruption is happening in terms of land grabs on the public land. I've been working in Ukraine during the time that we supported huge land reforms there. About $2-3 billion of public land was privatized in ways that were not very transparent. So I think that says enough. And I think better, and of course, if we do that, I think better land rights can actually transform these challenges that I mentioned initially into opportunities in terms of providing credit and investment incentives for creating urban floor space and productive urbanization and service delivery, foster climate change adaptation by targeting investments and informing public as well as private investments, supporting structural transformation, and also supporting women's access to and ability to use land as an asset. Let me just close by saying, yes, by reinforcing what Victoria said, that I think land is highly political everywhere. That means that, and that's why I think the research department is still important, because having independent analysis, having an independent reference to actually tell you how good you are doing objectively, rather than somebody who may actually also try to sell you something on the side, is very, very important, because there will be domestic debate and there will be people who, or you will be stepping on people's toes. So if you are stepping on people's toes, you better make sure that you know that you can defend yourself and you can argue your case and point to hard facts rather than evidence rather than stories. It also allows to avoid costly mistakes and to draw on global experience, which I already mentioned. And what we hope is that really, I think one of the beauties of land registries is that they have huge data. And I think as we digitize African registries, we will also have access to, these huge data will actually be increasingly available. I think the bank can play a very useful role as a broker, because of course this is identifiable information, nobody wants to share that. But if you actually can anonymize that and provide these data for research. So we hope that during the coming days, there will actually be significant opportunities for researchers and policymakers to discuss, to explore options for collaboration, evaluating specific interventions, and informing policy dialogue on this very important topic. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Klaus. I'm sorry to rush you, but the only reason why I was rushing you was because I was reading who our visitors are, and they've come a long way, for one thing, and they have a lot of experience. So I think I would like to get them into the conversation right away. So I'm going to start with my left, and then I'm going to go to my right. So on my left, the first person I'll turn to is Janet Edeme. She's the head of the Rural Economy Division of the African Union, and she's traveled here from Addis. So I'm going to ask you a couple of questions, Janet. Are you paying attention?
Yes, I
Yes,
am.
Okay. So I know that the African Union has the Agenda 2063. I don't know why you picked that year, but I'm sure you tell us. Yeah. And then you also have a Land Governance Strategy 2023-2032. And what I wanted to ask you was how do the recommendations of that strategy compare with those of the World Bank report that you just heard about? That's one thing. And then the second question was, can you tell us how the African Union is supporting its members on land issues? And then the third one is, do you see any opportunities to collaborate with us? And we hope that the answer to the last question is yes. Right, go ahead.
How many hours do I have?
No, you didn't. Go ahead, please.
Okay, so thank you very much, Indermit and Madam Victoria. It's a pleasure for me to be here this afternoon representing the African Union Commission. But let me start by extending the greetings of Madam Sako, who is the Commissioner for the department, is a long one, Department of Agriculture, Rural Development, Blue Economy, and Sustainable Environment. And then we would also, on behalf of the AU Commission, congratulate the World Bank on this report, which we think is very timely and also brings to the fore some of the long-standing as well as the emerging land-related challenges that the African continent faces. Madam Victoria had already mentioned some. She talked about issues around challenges on land governance. And then also Klaus, in his summary of the highlights, had identified some of the challenges from urbanization to the challenges the women are facing and the low resilience to climate change. Now, before I proceed, I will have to respond to some of your questions about how did we arrive at 2063. In 2013, when we were celebrating the 50th anniversary, if I should call it that, of the OAU and transiting to the African Union, so we came up with a 50-year strategic plan for the continent. So if you add 50 to 2013, you get 2063.
Even I get that, yes.
Even you get that. Okay, so that's how we came up with the Agenda 2063. So it's a 50-year strategic plan of the continent, and we are implementing it in 10-year phases. So we have just completed a review of the first 10-year implementation, and now we're in the second 10-year implementation plan of the Agenda 2063. Then I would also like to mention that this report has been published when our member states are also beginning to strategize on the best ways in terms of how they will be implementing their land policies that have both long and short-term benefits for our African citizens, particularly those of our citizens who rely on land for their livelihoods. So we know that basically all our countries do have land policies in one form or the other, but some of these land policies have been since colonial times. Some of them have not been reformed. Those have been reformed have been partial and had also been at the disadvantage of the women. And so this is where the issues of good land governance comes into play. Because we know that if we promote good land governance, this is essential if we're talking about realizing the African goal of economic growth and agricultural development. And we also take cognizance of the fact that our continent is a very youthful continent, very rapid population growth is taking place on the continent, but also the urbanization. And this is also putting a lot of pressure on our land resource. And of course, we know land resource is finite unless we're trying to invade another country. We would have to stick with the amount of land we have in each of the member states. And so the issue of land administration and management becomes even more important when we are also considering the impact of climate change that is also being experienced in many parts of Africa. We've seen the floods that have been taking place. We were in Nairobi last week for the African Fertilizer and Soil Health Summit. And Kenya is really going through a lot in terms of the floods that have been taking place. So Africa is really seriously affected by these disparities in terms of the impacts of climate change. And in addition, we are also still faced with challenges regarding the access, the use, the control, and the ownership of land by our women, our youth. We still have pastoralists in some regions of the continent, and of course, indigenous communities, and also other vulnerable groups, people living with disabilities, etc. So the issues around good stewardship of land becomes a priority for the African Union member states, considering that our economies are still highly agrarian and also based on natural resource exploitation. So the African Union realizes the importance of land governance to the continent's socioeconomic development, as well as having a peaceful and prosperous Africa, because that's our vision for 2063. We hope we will get there, in spite of a few hotspots here and there in terms of conflicts. But the Agenda 2063 also underscores the importance for our women to be fully empowered in all spheres with equal social, political, and economic rights, including the rights to own and inherit property, to sign contracts, to register and manage businesses, and also for our rural women to also have access to productive assets like land, like credits, inputs, and financial services. And so Agenda 2063 also envisages the elimination of all forms of systemic inequalities, exploitation, marginalization, and discrimination of young people, and to look at how we can mainstream our young people and youth-related issues into our development agendas, because, like I mentioned earlier on, our continent is still a very youthful continent. So let me fast forward to the land governance strategy. This was adopted by our ministerial committee made up of ministers responsible for agriculture, rural development, water and environment in December of 2021. And we had it launched last year during the Conference for Land Policy in Africa, which is the, we don't want to use the word regional, but it's your terminology, but it's our continental land policy conference that we organize every 2 years, basically for the African continent itself. And the land governance strategy, we do have 5 strategic objectives. And the first strategic objective is looking at how we can strengthen the capacity of the AU Commission, AUDA, NEPAD, and our regional economic communities. So this is where we see this report in terms of building our capacities in line with the land governance strategy. We can see how the data that's being generated through this report would go a long way in terms of building our capacities. And then, of course, promoting the advancement of land policies, the laws and administration, and of course, the land-based, large-scale land-based investments as well, and how we're also going to enhance the security of land tenure and access to land. And most importantly, we also recognize that the data that's being generated from this report could really support us in terms of operationalizing our monitoring and evaluation for land in Africa, which we call the MELA project. So we can see some points of synergies within the land governance strategy itself, and also this report that is being launched today. And so we believe that there are new opportunities that exist within the report as elaborated, and we can see how this can be used in terms of expediting the implementation of our land governance strategy, particularly the content that has to speak with digitalization and digitization as well, particularly for our land reforms. The technological advancements as well in reshaping the land administration. We can see some convergence in our land governance strategy and the report we are launching today. And so let me not take up too much time, but maybe just one final word is that within the second 10-year implementation plan, which is 2024 to 2033, we are also looking at how we want to strengthen our institutions, public institutions, and make them more responsive. And of course, the land institutions are also one of the key institutions we are thinking about. So within the next 10 years, we can see to a very reasonable extent that we would be able to make use of all of this very good information within this report that we're launching today. So thank you very much, Indemit. Thank you.
Excellent answers. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you, Janet. So I'm going to turn next to Emmanuel. So Emmanuel, you're the director of the Regional Center for Mapping and Resource Development in Nairobi, but you're also the person who was instrumental for Rwanda's successful tenure regularization, right? So could you tell us first thing about what were the 2 or 3 things that you really learned during the implementation of those initiatives? And then the second one was, how does your center actually share these lessons with member countries? And the third question is the same question that I asked Janet, which is, how can we help?
Thank you very much, Vice President. It's my pleasure to be part of this session. Well, to begin with the final question, I think the bank is already working with our center in many ways. First of all, by providing the important analytical work Klaus was talking about. Being a regional organization, we also support member states. And doing this kind of analytical work that helps advisory is extremely important. So our continued collaboration with the bank is very instrumental. But even when I talk about the case of Rwanda, where I was the head of the Land Authority and Chief Registrar of Land Titles for about 10 years, when Rwanda was implementing its land reform program, the bank was involved, again contributing to the analytical work. And Madame Victoria could attest to what was there because she was a country manager at one point in Rwanda during that period. So the case actually of Rwanda, sometimes when you talk about it and you look at the report that we have here today, it gives you sweet and sour, because one, the facts we have in this report are quite depressing in terms of the parameters of land governance on the continent. But at the same time, when you look at what we were able to achieve in Rwanda between 2009 and 2015, or thereabouts, you see that everything is doable. And the key parameters have been indicated in the report. We happen to live in an era where many of the factors have aligned for us to be able to succeed, whether it's the connectivity we are talking about, readily available geospatial data. Human capacity has improved immensely, but you ask ourselves why. I used to come here in the 2013, 2014, talk about Rwanda case. Why should I be talking about the same case 10 years later, and we don't have 10 other countries presenting similar success stories? So I think that's really, for me, the part that I wouldn't be happy about, and I hope we'll have more cases of really successful cases. But Rwanda is a small country, for those who don't know, in the heart of Africa. But from 2007 up to 2015, we were able to embark on a comprehensive land reform program. And without going through what exactly happened, it actually began by, first of all, analyzing what the land issue was in the country. But we did that not in isolation. We looked at it together with general national political issues. And that's really what the first lesson may be, which is also covered in this book, understanding the political economy of a country. Because whatever you do, it must be situated in whatever is happening within the general political economy of the country. Because that's when you know the stakeholders, where power lies, where the issues are, and whatever program you design must match that. And you know where to touch when you're designing a program like that. So it's very, very important. So I might share a case of Rwanda, but does not necessarily give an answer to, say, Malawi or another country until you understand that country specifically. So it happened at a period when Rwanda had come out of serious political issues. So we're analyzing the issues and looking at the future of Rwanda. So land featured as one of the central issues, whether as a cause of problems, but also as an answer to where the country wanted to go. So in designing a new constitution, we made sure we looked at land. What does land mean to a Rwandan person? It's, first of all, politically, it's natural heritage. Everybody has a right to it. It doesn't matter where you come from, what you look like. So that's a central issue. One, being a common heritage, you must preserve it. So the climate issues come in. So we must put in place environmental measures to make sure we preserve it for the future. So once that was there, we used this process also to rally people. And that's the second lesson maybe I will share. As you go through the process of land policy formulation, it's an opportunity to rally all stakeholders to a common direction. Because you bring people together, you discuss, and make sure you begin the journey together. Because that way you identify the people who are relevant, but at the same time, each one takes up a task that they move ahead with. So after the political process and policy, we are now went to the process of setting up the tools, which is the legislation, the regulatory framework and institutions. Because you have all these things together, but for them to actually happen, you need the actual legal things to make things happen. And then you need the people and institutions to move them forward. So we now began looking at what institutional framework we had. So at that time, land functions were scattered everywhere. So when I was brought in, my task at that time was to set up a new land authority. And we did that by bringing together all the functions. urban functions from infrastructure ministry, others from the local government, and we set up for the first time a land registry, a land authority that combined all these functions. And that's why at that time my title was Director General and Chief Registrar of Land Titles. So I combined the two roles to take the process forward. And then, of course, as we moved forward, we had to bring together different partners, the development partners, who are willing to support the country's recovery process. So the UK government and others came on board to provide the resources to pilot some of the ideas. Of course, because we were starting more or less afresh, we had the opportunity to experiment. So the issue of satellite imagery for demarcating plots was being used maybe practically for the first time. We knew it could happen. As all surveyors or geospatial technologists, we know it can happen. From high resolution, you can be able to georeference and determine the position on the ground, and therefore map. So the next was, how do we do the adjudication process? You use the local people. So the methodologies were done, we were able to trial them, and then developed a program which was supported by different partners. And as I said, the World Bank supported in the analytical work. Because all of us, this was experimental. We didn't know whether it was going to work. So we wanted an independent institution to really monitor what we were doing and see if what we were projecting was actually happening. And they were giving us lessons as we were moving ahead. So we were able to register almost 12 million titles within a period of less than 5 years. And today, Rwanda has land registered from border to border. Every piece of land has a title. And it's all digital, and it's linked to all other registries, which is the ID registry, the banks. So everybody's connected to the same registry. So if you want a loan, you don't have to walk to a bank. They have access to your title. So this has continued. Of course, we also developed capacity. I think in the next few days, the person who is heading land registry will probably be here to share more developments. But I can tell you today, Rwanda doesn't have paper title anymore. It's all digital. You get e-title. So if where I am here, I can go online, check a piece of land, whether there is a charge, who owns it, its use, and it's now been also connected to physical planning. So that's why even transferring property can happen in a day, because all I do is I check if you are the owner, I go to a notary, and that's also one development has happened. It has created jobs. So most of the government services have now been outsourced. Because when we ended this program, the challenge that was there was, how are you going to manage transactions on 12 million titles when we had previously had less than 100,000? So we tried to increase offices up to the lowest level, but it was still inefficient. So government now decided to privatize. So all now the transfers are signed by private notaries. The surveys are done by private people. If you go to Kigali, anybody who has a printing machine and a small computer, you create a job, because you don't have to take your application forms for transfer to an office. You go to this person. They scan your forms, put them, they can connect to a system. So all this has happened over a short period of time. And if I can move very quickly to where I am now, I now head the Regional Center for Mapping of Resources for Development. It's a center that was set up almost 50 years ago by the OAU and UNECA. So it was initially set up as a regional center for services in surveying, mapping, and remote sensing to help the countries to really be able to map their resources, plan for them, and monitor their use. So, but over time, because I think some of those technical elements countries are now good at them, we've moved to more the application. How do you use the surveys to help in agriculture, to monitor crop yields, for example, to monitor deforestation, to look at disasters, and help in registries. So the center is owned by 20 countries in Eastern and Southern Africa, from Sudan to South Africa. It's managed by the countries together with ECA. And every year, we get reports from countries. What I can say here is, much as we were more a geospatial surveying organization, every year the reports we get from countries indicate their main interest is land administration, is land governance. So we have some of the members, I think PS Chilonga from Malawi is one of part of our governing council as a member state. We have the PS from Zambia, who is here. So it's very, very important that we really keep working together. In the earlier session, we had a presentation on a survey that the bank did in the member states, where they were able to capture the governance situation in this land governance situation in these countries, looking at land registries, mapping status, land taxation, etc. And this helps us to really plan for these member states how we can support them. Because if you know the problem in, say, country X, it's about regulations. We can be able to compare with other countries and see how they can do peer running. So we were lucky to invite Klaus to present to our governing council in November last year some of these results. And I believe the permanent secretaries who were there were able to pick areas which they can take forward to improve the situation in their countries. And we hope this can really be kept going, because it's very important for people to know where they are, peer learn and plan informed reforms in their countries. So I'll rest it there for now, but really cooperation with the bank is very critical for our institutions and countries.
Well, what a great story, Emmanuel, and you tell it so beautifully. You tell it very well. Okay, so I'm going to switch to this side now, unless Aparajita, unless you want to say something? No? Okay. So I'm going to switch to Taiwo, and he's the chairman of the Presidential Committee on Fiscal Policy and Tax Reforms in Nigeria. Before this, he actually worked on the property tax reforms undertaken in Lagos State around 2010, which was under the leadership of then Governor Tinubu, who's now president. So this is often cited as an example for others to learn from, right? So I wanted to ask Taiwo that can you tell us how you're trying to build on and expand the success that that we saw in Lagos, and to ensure is to ensure that it sticks, right, especially in the rest of Nigeria, and then also sort of tell us what is the role of that property tax reform actually takes in terms of the in terms of the work of your commission. The thing, I just want to say one more thing. During the spring meetings of all the delegations that I met, the delegation from Nigeria was the one I came away from the most encouraged, just so you know. Yeah.
Thank you very much. So a very big thank you to the World Bank for inviting me to join this very important conversation. And thank you, Klaus, and to the team for the report. I can confirm that it's a good report. I'll quickly just give some context, and then I will try and answer your question as quickly as possible. Nigeria is a fairly complex jurisdiction when it comes to land matters. We have the federal government, state government, local governments. The laws on who owns land is made centrally. Ownership is mostly at the state level, but you have some at the federal and some at the municipal levels. We have all manners of charges collected across, and we don't have a lot of reliable data in the registry. So the issues and the challenges cut across policy, legal framework, and administration. This meeting is particularly important because some of the conversation we're having now, in fact, I'm meant to meet with the governors in a couple of days, and this is one of the agenda items where we're going to be discussing. Nigerians generally prefer to learn from the rest of Africa. So, and I see that opportunity in this book. And then more so, they prefer to learn from themselves. They rather copy from Lagos than copy from Washington or from Rwanda. But they'll tell you Rwanda, it's not up to half of Lagos. Like, that's supposed to be an excuse. As much as we're not very excited with where we are, we think it's an opportunity for transformative growth. So we're quite positive about the possibilities. What I want to quickly paint a picture for you of is the past, the present, and the future. Like I said, we do not have credible data around, ownership, use, value of properties, and we have very complex process for registration and transfer. As at the time the World Bank was doing the ease of doing business ranking, Nigeria ranking bottom 5 globally. I think we're like 183 out of 186 or something. So that paints a picture for you of how bad it was. In terms of revenue from taxes relating to land and property generally, it's almost like, was as if nobody was paying. So as of today, with the progress we have made, with the help from the World Bank, where they supported our states under the SIFTAS project, that's the States Fiscal Transparency, Accountability, Sustainability Project. We have seen progress, and we're currently at about 0.3% of GDP in revenue from land. We think that can go to around 1.5. Our time horizon for that is in the next 2 to 3 years with the reforms we're undertaking. The present situation where we find ourselves is that we're having all of these issues as well as the impact of climate change. We've seen flood in places like Lagos, but even some other states in Nigeria. And we see currently Lagos state government demolishing many properties. And these were people who had, some of them with their life savings. We don't have mortgages in Nigeria. You save, then you build a property. You were not able to get the planning approvals because it's almost impossible to get. And then you wake up one day and it's gone. So this for us is such a big issue that we need to address almost very urgently. We have divergent practices among different states, and then the lack of coordination between land, tax authorities, urban development, planning, and so on and so forth. We believe that we need to have that handshake with the different organs of government so they can work together to bring all of this to life in a way that can stimulate economic activities, create access for our people, be able to open the opportunity for credit, as well as things like real estate investment trust can also come up. So we're looking at a holistic reform approach to all of this. We estimate that the dead assets, the dead capital from land is around $900 billion that we can unlock with these forms of reforms that we're looking at. So what does the future look like for us? We think this is an opportunity for us to leapfrog. We learn from everyone and we see what we can do even better. We think that the biggest room for improvements in domestic revenue mobilization is in property taxation. Because like Claude said, less distortion, it's almost impossible to hide your property, but we know it's politically difficult, so we get that. As of today, you always be right to say that those who pay taxes don't own properties, and those who own properties don't pay taxes, because we did, one of the exercises we did was in Lagos, and we took the land register and compared with personal income tax, and we're only just lucky to find about 30% correlation. So you have 70% of people who own properties have no record at all for personal income tax payments. So that just gives you an idea of the possibilities. And I think it would not just be in terms of the property tax revenue, but also how that will rub off on everything else, including personal income tax, withholding tax on rent, stamp duties, capital gains tax, and so on and so forth. So we're looking at all of these as well in terms of how do we harmonize the identity for the landowners, and then even the kind of use the valuation. We're trying to introduce self-assessments. So I was saying to Claus during, I think it was over lunch, I was saying I have a property in Lagos State, and my land use charge in a year, if they remember to send me the assessment, it's less than the cost of a meal in a 5-star hotel. So you can imagine the cost of administering that, the stipend that you get from it. So we've said to the governor of Lagos State, for example, that if you target about 0.5% to 1% of the property value in land use charge, and you make it easy for people to pay, the information is available, they can actually raise more than 200% of the revenue they generate from all taxes today from that alone. And imagine that you channel that to the development of a community. What you then find is there's going to be a ripple effect. You collect the taxes, you develop the community, the property values go up, and then it funds almost everything you have done in the process. So I will quickly answer your questions. I know there's no time. The first one is, how are we building on the success in Lagos State over 10 years ago across Nigeria? I think it's already the things I've spoken to. I think we have better opportunities today to be able to not only replicate the success, but to build on it across Nigeria. And that's why we're having the engagement with all the governors from all the 36 states in Nigeria, and by extension, the 774 local governments, as well as with the support of the federal government at the center. The last question you asked is the role of property tax in the work of my committee. Yes, so my committee is focusing on fiscal policy reforms. And this is we identified very early on in the work we're doing that this is a critical part for the work and then for the successes that we want to measure. So we're intentional about how we are going about it. We have specific KPIs. We set to ourselves that we will not celebrate efforts, we will celebrate outcomes and the impact that they do make with specific timelines. So we are glad for this opportunity to interact today, and we look forward to more opportunity to engage not only with the World Bank, but with friends and partners around the table, and to learn from the examples of other countries. So thank you very much.
So thank you very much, Tevo. So I always thought that Indians and Nigerians were very similar. So for example, we behave like each other when we are in our countries, but when we come here, we behave like the Chinese, We work really hard and we do really well in studies and that kind of thing. But now I also know how we are different, because you said that in Nigeria, you don't want to learn from people in Washington, or you don't even want to learn from other countries, but you don't mind learning from other states within Nigeria. That's what makes us different, because in India we don't learn from other states either. We make our own mistakes all the time. Okay, so I should go to our last speaker. Last but not the least is David Chilonga. He is the Principal Secretary of the Ministry of Lands in Malawi. So I guess he's the top civil servant there. So the notes that I have here say that the land laws that were passed in 2016 in Malawi, they are innovative in several ways. And can you tell us about the key elements of these laws and what you have done to implement them? Since have you had difficulties in implementing the laws and so on? And has the World Bank helped you at all?
Thank you very much, Chairperson. So, first of all, the report reflects indeed what is happening on the continent, including the case of Malawi. The process in Malawi has evolved from 1996 when there was a Presidential Commission of Inquiry on Land Policy Reform and other studies which informed the development of the National Land Policy in 2002. This policy had some low-hanging fruits, which the bank also played a part. I'm happy to have Zambia here. Hello, Zambia, are you here? We need some energy in this room.
Available.
You are available? Okay. So one of the low-hanging fruits was the boundary reaffirmation with our neighbors. The police had encouraged us to do that, and we are almost done with the Malawi-Zambia border reaffirmation exercise. Resettlement works and introduction of new courses in universities, but there was a high-hanging assignment that was to holistically review all land-related laws, and as we've alluded to, a special law commission was impaneled in 2003 to review that, and by 2010, 11 bills were ready for discussion by Parliament, and these bills were passed in 2013, but the President refused to sign off because some civil society organizations had some reservations. As Emmanuel has stated, that forced us to go into further consultations so that we garner support from those who had concerns. And the middle ground was reached. In 2016, these laws were passed. And we had to draw lessons on how to implement them. So apart from engaging the World Bank, I think some study tours were done, including how Rwanda did it. Just to learn from the challenges and opportunities from them. Government had come up with an implementation plan, and we agreed with guidance from World Bank that we should start with the pilot phase to generate more lessons. And we did that through several projects financed by the bank. And we also, as the law required, particularly the Customer Land Act 2016, we needed to demarcate all the boundaries of the traditional authorities. And the bank assisted with that assignment, and we were able to finish that, which informed how we can start the actual titling of individual parcels. We were also challenged to start working on digitalizing our land records, and to make sure that these laws can be implemented at scale in a digital way. Then we are also challenged to undertake devolution or decentralization because the Customer Land Act is challenging us to have tribunals at a local level. I'm pleased to report that the Customer Land Tribunals have been established. Every traditional authority has now a regulated tribunal on how they can discharge their functions. Government has recruited land clerks to support the functionality and recording of all what those tribunals will be doing. And all through this process, the bank has been supporting technical support, financial support, including some analytical works. So far, we have started implementing the devolution, and the land information management system has been developed, and last 2 months the state president had officially launched it to just let all Malawians know that we are now going digital. We are also working on improving property taxation, and with the MCC Compact 2, which is effective from 6 May, one of the assignments is to help 4 city councils to improve in their revenue collection through a revised approach in terms of undertaking the Kwenkwen evaluation roles, including the supplementary roles. We have drafted evaluation bill to address the gaps which we thought must be addressed in order for the implementation to be more responsive. And we believe by July this should be into Parliament to become law. The land administration reform train in Malawi is progressing, and we believe we should be focusing on how the interventions can be sustainable. We had, as a minister, written Minister of Finance to say with these projections that we can improve revenue collection, which goes to account number one. Is there any possibility that we can be retaining 25% or 30% of the resource to allow us sustain the land information management system and all the interventions we are doing in case there is no any development partner? And as of last month, the Secretary to Treasury has given the approval. So we are sure that what we are doing would be sustainable, and we are able to own the process all through. So in terms of digital interoperability, the land information management system is interoperable with, as Emmanuel said, the registration bureau, the revenue authority, as well as some access by the banks and the law firms. I think with that, should we stop? And maybe I can tackle some of the issues should there be any questions. Thank you.
This is excellent. Thank you so much, and thank you for keeping to the time. We actually have time for some questions now. Who wants to ask questions of our speakers? One. Anybody else? Two. Three. You go first, please.
Thank you very much to all our esteemed speakers. It's really great to get this first-hand accounts of the work that you're doing. My name is Oyebola Okumugbe. I am in the research department. And my question is about how, in practice, these property taxes are being enforced. We know that compared to things like consumption taxes like the VAT, where it's just as soon as you buy it, you're paying it, or things like the personal income tax, where it's just being withheld. The property tax is a very salient tax. So, you mentioned the example how you can observe the property, those are the advantages, less distortionary, but on the other side, everybody knows when they have to pay that money. And then in trying to enforce it, it's really difficult to kick people out of their homes or to seize the properties. So I think this has really been the tension, and I would just love to hear your thoughts on how in practice how this can be enforced. It's the bottom left button you have to press. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. This is really interesting. And thanks to the World Bank for this opportunity. I am Mamadou Barrow. I'm the director of the Bureau of Applied Research in Anthropology at the University of Arizona. But I'm a Sahelian. I've been working on land issues for many time. And actually my question, maybe the World Bank might be, should answer those questions, because it's really about, when looking back at the Sahel where I'm from, I think this book is really fascinating. And as a teacher, I will make it required for my students starting next year. Really independent research is needed in the area of land. And I think, we have a lot of interesting stories. What Emmanuel said, the case of Rwanda is really fascinating, and I've been following it for many years now. But we have a lot of also failure in many, especially in the Sahel, things really, to tell the truth, did not work. And as was stated, this issue of land is an issue, is a political issue. If the World Bank is interested in making significant change, which I think is the case, it might need to review, its actions in some parts of Africa when it comes to land governance. And I think, that would be very, I was recently on a webinar that I organized for Sahelians. Close to 400 young people attended, and they really, and I mentioned I'm going to the World Bank, please make sure to bring our voices to those leaders, and to make sure that actually in terms of the youth and also women. It's the hope is on the land. And if you have bad governance, which is the case in many other places where we don't have a lot of success stories, then we have to look deeply at what went wrong. So, so my question to you is, how far are you willing to go in places where you might see evidence of bad will or just resistance to make some kind of meaningful change? What do you plan to do? Because to me, it's really, and it's sad when I travel a lot in Africa. I'm going to be leaving in a week from now. If you look at countries like even Senegal right now, you know, what happened just a few weeks ago in the area of chess is, we don't have time to talk about it right now, is an illustration of what I'm trying to get at. So really independent research is needed. Now, some people will be upset. I mean, of course, I mean, when you try to change, there is sometimes resistance. But I'm just wondering, you know, how far can you go in terms of I know, I mean, it's up to the states to change the situation, but also the World Bank is a powerful organization. I mean, what kind of leverage do you have sometimes, at least to say, well, if you're not doing what we feel is the right thing, then we might not be doing X.
Got it.
Okay, so that's the question that I have for you.
Got it. It's a good question. I don't have an answer to it, but I hope somebody from the Africa region is over here. Otherwise, I'm going to pick on somebody to answer the question. Sorry? You can share your thoughts. Excellent. One more question over here. Yes, please.
Hi, I'm Jake Ricker-Gilbert from Purdue University. I had a similar question about resistance. Collecting taxes is hard everywhere, not to mention here in Washington. How do you push back against the forces that benefit from the disorganization and are resisting what you're trying to do? If you could talk more about that, it would be great. Thank you.
Does anybody else have any questions? Yes, sir. Please.
Yeah, thanks so much for the opportunity. My name is Shawak Anna. I work for the World Bank from Ethiopia country office, and I want to raise one question related to a grand conclusion highlighted by Klaus regarding the comprehensive rural land titling unlikely to priority without full urban coverage, given that African countries are agrarian, yes, but we are urbanizing in alarming rate, unless we, with low-cost land registration and then cadastral system cover the rural setting, I don't think, you know, this urban complex context, if we were to cover that one, then we will be challenged. So I want to get more clarification of this conclusive but arguable conclusion from this research. Thank you.
All excellent questions. And so I think what we should do is, why don't we go to this side first? And no, actually, whoever wants to answer the questions is fine. But I first go to Aparajita, and then to Emmanuel, then Janet, then to Taiwo, and then finally to Deve, and I'll give the last word to Klaus.
Thank you, Indermit, and thank you again to our partners for being here. Let me take Oyebola's question, which is a really great question, and I think a key motivation for us when we were doing this report is just this gap in revenue collection, right? So you have OECD countries collecting about 3 or 4% of their GDP in property taxes alone. You have 0.5%, you know, overall in African countries. And so just, you know, we could have written this whole report just on property taxation, just sort of what is the infrastructure that's needed around increasing, you know, those revenues. So when it comes to demarcation of property, when it comes to you know, ownership, valuation, and enforcement. And I think the challenge with enforcement is that transparency is key, right? In sort of showing where that revenue is going. And I think one factor is, you know, property taxes, the revenue being used to deliver services that matter for people. And, you know, it's not the only one. I mean, you know, but I think having that transparency can be really key in building that consensus around enforcement. I'm sure Taiwo has some very practical also experiences, but I can circle back, but let me stop here.
Thank you very much. On the taxation issue, I think I have a different take. One of the things that we did with the land program in Rwanda, we actually kept the issue of taxes out of the conversation, because one of the biggest pushbacks that we had from the population was that this was being done so that we tax them. And you would find, including the World Bank, that was the main issue. They were talking about the economic benefits of registering, but for us, we are telling our people, no, for us, registration is good in itself even without any taxes. We said this is just to address the social harmony of our population, tenure security, etc. So we really pushed away this discussion. And indeed, even during the registration process, we made sure we covered most of the registration costs ourselves, and people made a nominal contribution. So even when taxes were introduced later, we said it should be done slowly. The rates should be kept low and being increased as people see the benefits. So one, we kept that discussion out. Even when it was introduced, we began with really figures that people could not easily even notice, but you increase the number of people who are contributing. So that way, you are able to have digitalization without any major resistance. So the moment people are within the bracket and you have a digital register, then there's transparency. Even when you are putting these taxes, people know there are no special people who run away from it, like the report says. Nobody's going to manipulate since everything is transparent. So you begin with small rates that grow slowly, but more importantly, show where these taxes are going. I think if you go to Kigali, most of the neighborhoods, roads have been tarmacked. So people want to pay the money because the money is going to actually provide the services. So I think it's very, very important to make sure that that second part of making sure people see what the taxes are doing is demonstrable through the actions of government. Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to stay out of the money issues and the taxes. That's not my space. But I think the professor from
I was hoping you'd answer that.
Arizona, and when he talked about some of these strategies, usually the pushback comes because it's a top-down approach. When you come up with strategies that have not been inclusive of the beneficiaries of those strategies, you will definitely get a pushback. And so for us at the level of the AU Commission, what we normally do is before we come up with a strategy where we get our member states to endorse those strategies, there's a lot of consultation that takes place. It's very intensive, it's very lengthy, and it's highly consultative. So when you are able to go through that very intensive consultative process and you have a bottom-up approach, then you will have very minimal pushback because it's a strategy that will be developed by the people themselves. And they are the ones who will tell you, this is what we want in a strategy. And you'll find it much easier as well in domesticating. But when it's a top-down, in terms of developing the strategies, you will definitely get the pushback. So the strategies that we have developed at the level of the AU Commission, we've never had those pushbacks because we don't develop any strategy unless it's highly consultative and it's agreeable to our 55 member states. Otherwise, such strategies will not be endorsed. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. I'll take the question from Oyebola and Jik together, which is really how do we get people to pay these taxes and how do you address the pushback? So, of course, I don't think there are human beings anywhere in the world who are excited to pay taxes. So people pay either because they don't want to get into trouble or because they feel the sense of if I'm getting some benefit, maybe I should also contribute. We see an interesting scenario play out recently in the Federal Capital Territory in Nigeria. Once we have a new government, less than 1 year ago, we had a new minister for the Federal Capital Territory. And he just announced that by the way, you guys have not been paying your property taxes, and I'm going to revoke your your title. And there was a long queue lining up to pay taxes. So I think they've collected maybe 500% of what they collected previously, just from that. And I'm not saying that will work everywhere in Nigeria. So even within Nigeria itself, the approach has to be different. What you might be able to do in Lagos and FCT and get away with it may not work in the north at all. So it's taking all of that into account. The governor before the current one in Lagos State lost his election, partly due to a bad policy around land use charge. And this is some of the things you have to put into consideration is you have to start from the least resistance angle of taxpayers. If you ask the poorest people to pay tax that they cannot afford, it will be a problem. And I honestly think that if you want it to be progressive, that's not where you need to target. You need to look elsewhere. We're working with a scenario of the top 25% of properties should be what we target. Then you should exempt 75%. And that will give you the magic. So there's also the pushback from establishments and people who benefit from the status quo. And sometimes there are politicians in high places with a lot of resources. That is the one that is quite sensitive. Our approach is to not start with attacking their interests. We think that if we start from the easy ones where you are not really attacking them, you gain momentum, you win public trust, and then you can bring on the more difficult issues to be able to address them. I think lastly is a question from, I think, Muhammadu. I hold a slightly different view. I feel like we should not be asking the World Bank what they can do to help Africa. So this is not World Bank's problem, this is Africa's problem. My perspective to this is we're here to learn from other countries, from the reports by the World Bank, and then we go and implement it. It's our problems, we should solve it by ourselves. We don't mind when we get help, but we should not be asking for anyone to help us. Thank you.
David?
No, just to concur with colleagues that the property tax issue can only be effective in our context if the revisions are incremental, not just what you think is the potential tax payable. Thank you.
Last word.
Okay.
I think we are almost out of time, so you take 1 minute and you finish.
We should always throw some controversial things into the debate, no? To get some. So I think, I mean, on Oyebola's question, I think the enforcement is very simple, and that I think there's that fantastic paper by Tanner, which I think you know that in Africa, where they tried to do that experiment of creating awareness in Uganda, and people found out that rather than them expecting 30% having paid, only 10% pay. And of course, you're stupid if you pay, so that actually decreased tax payment. I think the way to enforce property taxes is to require a tax clearance certificate if you want to do subsequent transfers, including registering a loan. And that will do the trick, and that is similar to what you were saying there. And that, of course, that requires, and I think then that requires a digital system and a complete tax roll. And I think the interesting part, which I think we elaborate much more in the report, of using property, I think in Nigeria, getting a title, if you're not filthy rich, you can forget about it because the surveyors will not, I mean, you have to pay thousands of dollars for the survey. And I think if you can use property taxation as a path to actually get ownership documentation, and that can be, I mean, that is a legal issue, because you can definitely say if after the statute of limit, I mean, if you pay 12 years or 15 years property taxes without anybody laying additional claim to that land, you actually can mature your rights into ownership. I think that is something that will increase the, I mean, despite the visibility and everything, and of course we all know that you need to use the proceeds from the tax wisely, but I think that would be the thing, and that would also, because I think no intervention to improve property registries in Africa without looking at transaction taxes is even remotely viable, because they will all fail. Nobody will be, I mean, no bank will register alone if you have to pay such outrageous registration fees. So I think registration fees is a key part of that, and a reform where you can say, okay, means look, we slash registration fees, but we actually increase property taxes, or we let you pay fair property taxes, which also solves, by the way, the problem of documents getting outdated, because if you pay property tax annually, then at least there is a record of who pays that, and that gives you documentation. I think that would be the way I would think about property taxes. So I think, Sheva, we can talk bilaterally. I think, what I was saying is use rights, not titling. I mean, Ethiopia didn't do titling. If they would have done title, they wouldn't have gotten 10% as far as they got with this local decentralized process of documenting user rights that initially didn't even have a spatial reference to it. But it shows, and I think, and studies show that 40% of misallocation. So I think huge impact of just this very simple measure, but it was done in a decentralized way and a democratic way. And of course, and Mamadou, I think having the World Bank cannot fix every problem in this world, unfortunately, and that's why it's so important to have independent research, and that's why it's so important also that that there is partnerships between researchers and operations, so that the data is actually made available to researchers, because that is the key bottleneck. Many projects and countries don't want anybody to see what they are doing. If we can have some partnerships and actually increase transparency, it's not the World Bank who has to do the research. I think we have plenty of partners who can do that very well, but I think that would be the way to increase transparency, and also to provide important lessons that will be important for other countries. And I mean, I think some of the papers that will be presented on the Sahel and pastoralism and pastoralist conflict, I think, are very much policy relevant and very clear on what should be done in terms of decentralization and linking these resources. But here I stop, otherwise
very good. No, excellent. I think I don't need to say much more other than to say first, thank you very much to Aparajita and to you for doing this very good report and for setting up this discussion. And then the second part, I would really like to thank our visitors, Janet, Emmanuel, Taiwo, and Dev, to actually come all the way from Africa and to actually tell us about the things. So I have to tell you that, at least as far as I'm concerned, I have been a lot more informed now about what's going on in the region, but I'm also a lot more optimistic. These are really nice stories to hear. So I would just like us to give them a huge thanks and a big applause. Thank you. Thank you very much.